Sometimes the people we've hurt the most are the hardest ones to face. And sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Deep in the Texas wilderness, Buck Rawlins, a 68-year-old cowboy who spent a lifetime running from his mistakes, is tied to a tree and left to die. His only chance at survival is a scruffy stray dog with mismatched eyes who refuses to leave his side. What begins as a desperate fight to stay alive becomes something far more profound, a journey back to the people he abandoned and the life he thought he'd lost forever. But can a man who spent decades pushing everyone away find the courage to ask for forgiveness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days before Buck Rawlins found himself tied to that tree, he was standing in front of a bathroom mirror in a single-wide trailer on the outskirts of Austin, examining a face that had become a stranger's. 68 years had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, lines that spoke of too much sun and not enough laughter. His hair, what remained of it, had gone white as cotton, and his hands, still strong, still capable, bore the scars of 1,000 days of hard work. The trailer park where Buck lived wasn't much to speak of. 15 aging mobile homes arranged in a horseshoe around a patchy common area where nothing much grew, except disappointment and dandelions. The place was called Sunset Vista, though there wasn't much of a view, and the sunsets were obscured by a highway overpass half a mile away. Buck had been there for 3 years, ever since his last ranch hand job had dried up. Before that, it had been another trailer park. Another town, another stretch of Texas he'd drifted through like tumbleweed. He pulled on a faded blue work shirt, the fabric soft from 100 washings, and reached for his wallet. The leather was cracked and worn smooth, dark with age and the oil from his hands. It had been his father's wallet once, passed down when Buck turned 21, back when such things still held meaning. Inside, there was $43, a driver's license that needed renewing, and a single photograph. Buck didn't look at the photograph often. Some mornings he could go through his entire routine: coffee from the gas station, scanning the classifieds for day labor, eating whatever was cheapest without thinking about it at all. But today, for reasons he couldn't name, he slid it out and held it up to the weak light filtering through the trailer's window. Emma, 8 years old in the picture, gap-toothed and grinning, her hair in pigtails tied with yellow ribbons. She was sitting on a fence rail at the old ranch, the one Buck had walked away from 20 years ago. Behind her, you could just make out the barn, red paint peeling even then, and the hill country rolling away toward a horizon Buck used to think would always be there. She'd be 42 now, a woman grown with a life Buck knew nothing about. Did she still smile like that? Did she ever think about him? He'd asked himself these questions so many times they'd worn grooves in his mind. Paths he walked down, despite knowing there were no good answers at the end of them. Buck tucked the photo back into his wallet and slid the wallet into his back pocket. The weight of it, slight as it was, pressed against him like an accusation. Outside, the October morning was already warm, promising another scorcher by afternoon. Texas didn't ease into fall the way other places did. It went from summer to a slightly less aggressive version of summer, with maybe a week or two of actual cool weather if you were lucky. Buck climbed into his truck, a 1987 Ford F-150 that ran more on stubbornness than gasoline, and headed toward town. He'd lined up work through a contractor he knew, a man named Luis, who hired day laborers for construction cleanup. It wasn't glamorous, hauling debris and sweeping up sawdust, but it paid cash and didn't ask questions. Buck had learned long ago that a man who kept his head down and his mouth shut could get by just fine without anyone knowing his name or his history. The job site was a new development going up on the eastern edge of Austin, one of those instant neighborhoods where every house looked like every other house, and the trees were saplings held up by stakes. Buck worked alongside men half his age, most of them speaking Spanish, all of them too polite to mention that the old cowboy with the white hair probably should have retired years ago. By noon, Buck's back was aching, and his shirt was soaked through with sweat. He sat in the shade of an unfinished garage, eating a sandwich he'd made that morning, plain bologna on white bread, and listening to the younger men joke with each other in rapid-fire Spanish. He caught maybe one word in three, but he understood the tone. It was the same wherever men worked together, complaints about bosses, boasts about women, dreams of someday having enough money to stop doing this kind of work. Buck had stopped having those dreams a long time ago. Somewhere in his 40s, he'd accepted that this was his lot, moving from job to job, town to town, never staying long enough for anyone to ask too many questions about where he'd come from or why a man his age was still living out of a truck and a trailer. The afternoon dragged on. Buck's mind wandered the way it often did during repetitive work, drifting back through the years like a man sorting through old photographs. The ranch, his father, stern and stoic, teaching him to rope and ride before Buck was old enough for school. His mother, who died when Buck was 12, leaving behind a house that never quite felt warm again. And Dale, his younger brother by 3 years, who'd looked up to Buck with an admiration Buck had never felt he deserved. Dale. The name still brought a tightness to Buck's chest, a knot of guilt and anger and regret that had never loosened in 20 years. The fight they'd had the last time they'd spoken played in Buck's memory in fragments, like a film reel that kept skipping. Dale wanting to modernize, to expand. Buck refusing, clinging to their father's ways. Words spoken in anger, words that couldn't be taken back. And then Buck, too proud to admit he might be wrong, packing a bag and driving away from everything he'd ever known. He'd told himself at the time that it was about principle, about honoring their father's legacy. But late at night, in the quiet of whatever room or trailer he was living in, Buck knew the truth. It had been about pride, about being too stubborn to bend, and too scared to admit he might have been wrong. By the time Luis called it a day, Buck was exhausted in a way that went deeper than muscles and bones. He collected his $80 cash and drove back toward the trailer park, stopping at a convenience store for a 6-pack of the cheapest beer they had. It was a ritual he performed most evenings, one of the few constants in a life that had become untethered from anything meaningful. But instead of heading straight home, Buck found himself driving west, toward the part of town he usually avoided. The streets here were older, more established, with oak trees that had been growing since before Buck was born. He passed houses with well-kept lawns and mailboxes painted with family names. The Fletcher place, the Rodriguez home, the kind of places where people put down roots and stayed. He pulled into the parking lot of a bar called the Dusty Boot, a place that had been there for 30 years at least. Buck had been inside maybe twice in his life, both times decades ago. But tonight, for reasons he didn't examine too closely, he felt the need for something more than drinking alone in his trailer. The bar was dimly lit and half empty, the kind of place that catered to regulars and didn't much care for anyone else. Buck took a stool at the end of the bar and ordered a whiskey, neat. The bartender, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and capable hands, poured without comment and moved on. Buck sipped his drink and watched the television mounted in the corner, some news program with the sound turned down. He wasn't paying attention to the images, just letting the light and movement wash over him while his mind continued its wandering. 2 stools down, a pair of men were talking in low voices. Buck wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the bar was quiet enough that he couldn't help but hear. "I'm telling you, the money's real," one of them said. He was younger, maybe 40, wearing boots that looked too new and a shirt that had probably never seen an honest day's work. "Voight's company is buying up everything out there. Old ranches, farmland, doesn't matter. They're planning some kind of development. What about the Rawlins place?" the other man asked. He was older, closer to Buck's age, with a weathered face that spoke of time outdoors. Buck's hand tightened on his glass. "Foreclosure," the first man said. "Bank's about to take it. Voight's got first option to buy once that goes through. Should be any day now." The older man shook his head. "Shame. That place has been in the Rawlins family since the 40s. Dale Rawlins kept it going for years, even after his brother took off. Heard he died a few years back. Buck felt something cold settle in his stomach. Dale was dead, his little brother gone, and Buck hadn't even known. He wanted to turn to the men, to demand more information, but he couldn't make his body move. He sat frozen, the whiskey burning in his throat. Dale never married, did he? The first man asked. Nope. Left everything to his niece, I think. Emma something. But she couldn't keep up with the payments. Story I heard is she's got medical debt from taking care of her mother before she passed. Ranch has been bleeding money for years. Emma, Buck's daughter, the little girl in the photograph. Now a woman struggling with debts he knew nothing about. The ranch, his father's ranch, the land 3 generations of Rawlins had worked, about to be sold off to developers. Buck paid for his drink with shaking hands and walked out into the parking lot. The night air felt cool against his flushed face. He stood beside his truck, one hand on the door handle, trying to make sense of what he'd heard. Dale was dead. The ranch was in foreclosure. Emma was drowning in debt. And Buck had been living in a trailer park drinking cheap beer, telling himself he'd done the honorable thing by walking away. He climbed into his truck and sat there in the darkness, the engine ticking as it cooled. The photograph in his wallet seemed to burn against his back pocket. 8-year-old Emma, smiling on a fence rail, on land that was about to pass out of the family forever. Buck had spent 20 years running from his mistakes. 20 years telling himself it was too late to go back, too late to make things right. But sitting in that parking lot, listening to the distant sound of traffic on the highway, he felt something shift inside him. Not redemption, he knew he hadn't earned that, but maybe the first stirring of a question he'd been too afraid to ask himself. What if it wasn't too late? He started the truck and headed not back to the trailer park, but west again, toward the hill country where he'd grown up, and toward the ranch he'd abandoned. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he'd do when he got there. But for the first time in 20 years, Buck Rawlins was driving towards something instead of away from it. The road unwound ahead of him, dark and empty. The dashboard lights cast a green glow across his weathered hands on the steering wheel, and in his wallet, pressed against the worn leather, the photograph of Emma waited, a reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he might never get back. Buck arrived at the ranch just after dawn. The eastern sky was bleeding pink and orange, painting the hills in colors that reminded him of childhood mornings when his father would wake him before first light to check on the cattle. The entrance was marked by 2 stone pillars that his grandfather had set in concrete back in 1947, the year the ranch was established. A chain hung between them, but it wasn't locked. Someone had been here recently. He drove down the rutted dirt road, his truck bouncing over washouts and potholes that hadn't been there 20 years ago. On either side, the land stretched out in rolling hills, covered with mesquite and live oak, the grass gone brown from the summer heat. 300 acres of Texas hill country, bought with his grandfather's savings after the war and built up over 3 generations. And Buck had walked away from it over a disagreement about a loan. The house came into view first, a 2-story ranch house with a wraparound porch, painted white once, but now weathered to gray. The barn stood behind it, listing slightly to the left, its red paint peeling in long strips. Everything looked smaller than Buck remembered, shrunken somehow. Or maybe he'd just carried it larger in his memory all these years. He parked near the barn and climbed out slowly, his joints protesting after the long drive. The morning was already warm, and the air smelled like dust and cedar. Buck walked toward the house, each step heavy with memory. There was the oak tree, where he and Dale had built a treehouse one summer. There was the creek bed, dry now but full in spring. There was the corral where his father had taught him to break horses. A sound made him turn. Fresh tire tracks led around the barn toward the back pasture. Not old tracks either, recent, probably within the last few days. Buck followed them, a sense of unease growing in his chest. Behind the barn he found what he was looking for. Survey stakes had been driven into the ground in a grid pattern, the kind developers used when planning construction. Bright orange flags marked the corners. And there, parked near the tree line, was a new pickup truck, a Silverado with a logo on the door that read Voight Development Corporation. 3 men were gathered around a table set up on the tailgate, studying what looked like blueprints. They didn't notice Buck at first. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on dry grass, his heart hammering in his chest. "This is private property," Buck said, his voice rusty from disuse. The men looked up. 2 were younger, maybe in their 30s, dressed in work clothes and looking like hired muscle. The 3rd was older, close to 50, wearing expensive boots and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. This one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Private property that's about to belong to my company," the man said. He had an easy confidence that Buck distrusted immediately. "You the caretaker?" "I'm Buck Rawlins," Buck said. "This land belongs to my family," the man's smile widened. "Carson Voight. And technically, Mr. Rawlins, this land belongs to the bank. Or it will, once the foreclosure goes through next week. We're just doing preliminary surveys." "Get off my land," Voight laughed, glancing at his 2 companions. "Your land? Where have you been for the last 20 years? Dale Rawlins kept this place running until he died. His niece tried to hold on, but she couldn't make the payments. You don't get to show up now and claim ownership." Buck felt anger rising in his chest, hot and familiar. It was the same anger that had driven him away 2 decades ago, the kind that made him say things he regretted. He forced himself to breathe slowly. "I never gave up my claim," Buck said. "My name's still on the deed." Voight's expression hardened. "Then you're liable for the debts too, old man." "You want to step up and pay off $200,000? No." "Then get out of our way and let us work." Buck didn't move. He couldn't explain, even to himself, why he was standing his ground. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was guilt over Dale. Maybe it was the memory of that photograph in his wallet. But he wasn't leaving. "I said, get off my land." One of the younger men stepped forward. He was big, probably 6'3", and solid muscle. "Mr. Voight, you want us to handle this?" Voight studied Buck for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Then he nodded. "Make sure he understands the situation. What happened next was fast and brutal." Buck had been in plenty of fights in his younger days. Bar brawls, disagreements over cattle, the kind of rough conflict that came with ranch life. But he was 68 years old, and these men were professionals. The big one grabbed Buck's arm and twisted it behind his back before Buck could react. The other one hit him in the ribs, hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Buck fought back as best he could, landing one solid punch that split the smaller man's lip. But it was 3 against 1, and age wasn't on Buck's side. They drove him to his knees, then dragged him toward the tree line as he struggled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Voight said, walking alongside them. "All you had to do was leave." They hauled Buck deep into the woods, farther than he'd walked in years. His ribs screamed with each breath, and he could taste blood in his mouth. Finally, they stopped at a gnarled oak tree, its trunk twisted with age. The men bound Buck's wrists with rope, then secured him to the tree, wrapping more rope around his chest and torso. The bark bit into his back through his shirt. His head was spinning, and he could feel wetness above his right eye, where one of them had hit him. "Nobody comes out here," Voight said, crouching down to Buck's level. "By the time anyone finds you, if anyone finds you, this deal will be done, and you'll just be a sad old man who got lost in the woods." "Should have stayed gone," Buck Rawlins. They walked away, taking Buck's truck keys and his wallet with them. Buck heard the truck engines start, heard them drive away, and then there was only silence. He tested the ropes, but they were tied well. His arms were already going numb from the position. The sun was climbing, and he could feel the heat beginning to build. He had no water, no phone, no way to signal for help. The nearest road was 5 miles away through rough terrain. Buck looked down at his chest and saw his father's pocket watch had fallen from his shirt pocket during the struggle. It lay in the dirt at his feet, the crystal cracked, the hands frozen at 9:47, the exact time his father had died of a heart attack 15 years ago. Buck had carried it every day since, a reminder of the man he'd failed to live up to. Now it lay in the dust, stopped forever. Just like Buck's chances of making things right, the morning stretched into afternoon. Buck's mouth went dry. His head ached. The ropes cut into his wrists and chest, making each breath a struggle. He tried calling for help, but his voice was weak and there was no one to hear. The ranch was empty. Emma was in Austin. No one knew he was here. Buck closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He prayed, not for forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned that. Just for another chance. One more opportunity to fix what he'd broken. The sun beat down without mercy. Buck's head drooped. He could feel consciousness slipping away, the edges of his vision going dark. This was it then. This was how Buck Rawlins would end. Alone in the woods, tied to a tree, having never made peace with the people he'd hurt. A sound penetrated his fading awareness. Rustling in the brush. Buck tried to lift his head but couldn't manage it. Probably a coyote, drawn by the scent of blood. Or maybe a wild hog. Either way, Buck was in no position to defend himself. The rustling came closer. Buck forced his eyes open and saw something emerge from the mesquite. Not a coyote or a hog, but a dog. A medium-sized mutt, scruffy and lean, with a coat that might have been brown or grey, or some mixture of both. But it was the eyes that caught Buck's attention. One was blue, pale as a winter sky. The other was brown, deep and warm. The dog stood 10 feet away, watching Buck with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "Get out of here," Buck tried to say, but it came out as barely a whisper. The dog didn't move. It just stood there, studying Buck with those mismatched eyes, as if deciding something important. Then slowly it began to approach. Buck's first instinct was to shoo the animal away. Dogs could turn unpredictable around injured people, especially strays that had learned to survive on their own. But he didn't have the strength to do more than watch as the dog circled him slowly, nose to the ground, taking in his scent and situation. Up close, Buck could see the dog was male, probably 3 or 4 years old, with ribs showing beneath his patchy coat. Around his neck was a piece of frayed rope, worn smooth by time and weather, serving as a makeshift collar. No tags, no identification. This dog had been on his own for a while. "Go on," Buck managed to croak. "Nothing here for you." The dog ignored him. He completed his circle and came to stand directly in front of Buck, those mismatched eyes studying him with an intensity that made Buck uncomfortable. It felt like being seen, really seen for the first time in years. Then the dog did something Buck didn't expect. He moved behind the tree and began working at the ropes with his teeth, not chewing frantically or aggressively, but methodically, finding the knot and worrying at it with surprising precision. Buck felt a flutter of hope in his chest, dangerous and foolish. The rope was thick and the knots were tight. Even if the dog understood what needed to be done, which seemed impossible, there was no guarantee he could actually accomplish it. But the dog kept working, pausing occasionally to rest his jaw, then returning to the task. Time became meaningless. The sun moved across the sky. Buck drifted in and out of consciousness, his body shutting down to conserve what little energy remained. Each time he surfaced, the dog was still there, still working at the rope. "Why are you doing this?" Buck whispered during one of his lucid moments. "You don't know me." The dog paused and looked at him, and Buck could have sworn he saw understanding in those strange eyes. Then the dog returned to his work. Buck's mind wandered as his body weakened. He thought about Emma as a child, no more than 8 or 9, begging him for a dog. They'd been in town for supplies, and she'd seen a litter of puppies outside the feed store, free to a good home. She'd pleaded with those big eyes of hers, promising she'd take care of it, feed it, walk it, everything, and Buck had said no. Too busy with the ranch. Too much responsibility. A dog was just another mouth to feed, another thing to worry about. Emma had cried the whole way home, and Buck had told himself he was teaching her an important lesson about life not giving you everything you wanted. Now, 20 years later, a dog he'd never wanted was saving his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I should have gotten her that dog," Buck said to the animal working at his bonds. "Should have done a lot of things different." The rope around his left wrist loosened suddenly. The dog had found a weak point in the knot and worked it free. Buck's hand dropped, dead weight at first, the circulation cut off for too long. He couldn't feel his fingers. But as the blood flow slowly returned, bringing with it 1,000 pinpricks of pain, Buck forced his numb hand to work at the rope around his right wrist. It took another hour, maybe more. The dog watched, patient and alert, as Buck fumbled with knots he couldn't quite grip. Finally, mercifully, the second rope came free. Buck's arms dropped to his sides, useless as kindling. He leaned forward, trying to work at the rope around his chest, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The dog moved in again, working at the chest rope from a different angle. This time it went faster. The rope fell away, and Buck slumped forward. Would have fallen face first into the dirt if the dog hadn't been there to lean against. They stayed like that for several minutes. Buck barely conscious, the dog solid and warm beside him. Buck could feel the animal's heartbeat, steady and strong, a reminder that life continued even when everything else fell apart. "Thank you," Buck whispered into the dog's fur. It smelled like mesquite and dust and something wild that couldn't be named. The dog pulled away and nudged Buck's shoulder with his nose, firm and insistent. Buck understood. They couldn't stay here. He needed water, needed help, needed to get somewhere safe before the sun finished what Voight's men had started. Buck tried to stand. His legs buckled, and he went down on his hands and knees, the world spinning. The dog circled him, whining softly, and Buck was reminded of horses he'd worked with, how they'd sometimes pace when they were anxious, looking for a solution to a problem they couldn't quite solve. "I'm trying," Buck told the dog. "Give me a minute." He made it to his feet on the second attempt, standing bow-legged and swaying like a drunk. His ribs screamed with each breath, and his head felt like it had been split open with an axe. But he was standing. That was something. The dog started walking, stopped, looked back at Buck expectantly. Buck followed. There was nothing else to do. He had no sense of direction, no idea which way led to help. But the dog seemed to know where he was going. And Buck had learned in the last few hours that this animal was smarter than he looked. They made slow progress through the woods. Buck stumbled frequently, catching himself on tree trunks or dropping to his knees when his legs gave out. Each time the dog waited patiently, sometimes coming back to press against Buck's side, offering support. Buck talked to the dog as they walked, rambling words that came from a place deeper than conscious thought. He told the dog about Emma, about the photograph in his wallet that Voight's men had taken. He told him about Dale and the fight that had driven them apart. He told him about the ranch and his father and all the ways Buck had failed to live up to the legacy he'd been given. The dog listened, those mismatched eyes occasionally glancing back, and Buck felt something shift inside him. For 20 years he'd kept these thoughts locked away, too ashamed to speak them aloud. But here in the woods, with no one to judge him but a stray dog, the words poured out like water from a broken dam. "I was a coward," Buck said, his voice hoarse. "That's the truth of it. I was too proud to admit I might be wrong, and too scared to face what that meant. So I ran, and I kept running." And now his voice broke. Buck stopped walking and leaned against a cedar tree, breathing hard. The dog came back and sat at his feet waiting. "Now it's too late," Buck finished. "Dale's gone?" "The ranch is gone. Emma's better off without me. I'm just an old fool who can't even die right." The dog made a sound that was almost like disagreement, a soft huff through his nose. Then he stood and nudged Buck's leg again, insistent. Buck pushed off from the tree and followed. The sun was lowering in the sky when Buck heard the sound of running water. The dog led him through a final stand of mesquite, and there it was. A creek, not much more than a trickle at this time of year, but water nonetheless. Buck dropped to his knees and drank, cupping his hands and bringing the cool liquid to his cracked lips again and again. The dog drank beside him, lapping steadily, and for a moment they were just two creatures sharing a water source. All pretense of civilization stripped away. Buck sat back on his heels, water dripping from his chin, and looked at the dog, really looked at him. The scruffy coat, the lean frame, the rope collar that marked him as someone's property once, before he'd been abandoned or lost. This dog knew what it meant to be cast aside. He'd survived it, and somehow he'd chosen to save Buck instead of leaving him to the fate Buck probably deserved. "You got a name?" Buck asked. The dog tilted his head, one blue eye and one brown eye, studying Buck with that same unsettling intelligence. "Didn't think so," Buck said. "Neither did I for a long time. Just went by whatever folks called me. Hey, you." Old man, nobody. But my name's Buck Rawlins. And I think, he paused, surprised by what he was about to say. I think you just saved my life, Scout. The name felt right. The dog seemed to agree. His tail wagging slowly for the first time since they'd met, Buck reached out and touched the dog's head, his fingers gentle on the rough fur. All right then, Scout. Let's see if we can figure out where to go from here. Scout led Buck along the creek for another mile before veering off into a stand of oak trees. Buck followed, his legs moving on autopilot now, his mind focused on nothing more than putting one foot in front of the other. The sun was touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Buck of his mother's watercolors. They emerged into a small clearing, and Buck saw their destination, an old line shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but intact. He recognized it immediately. The Rawlins family had built it 50 years ago, back when they'd run cattle across these hills and needed shelter for the hands during roundup season. Buck had spent nights here himself, as a teenager, learning the work from his father. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but still opened. Inside, dust covered everything. A small table, 2 chairs with broken rungs, a narrow cot with a stained mattress. In the corner, a wood stove sat cold and empty. But it was shelter, and after hours in the sun, that was enough. Buck collapsed onto the cot, which creaked in protest, but held. Scout did a quick patrol of the space, nose working overtime, then came to lie down on the floor beside the cot. Buck reached down and rested his hand on the dog's back, drawing comfort from the solid warmth. "Thank you," Buck said again. The words seemed inadequate for what Scout had done, but they were all he had. Night fell quickly. Buck's body demanded sleep, but his mind wouldn't settle. His ribs throbbed with each breath, and his head pounded where they'd hit him. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that Voight and his men had taken his wallet, his keys, everything that connected him to the life he'd been living. More than that, they'd taken the photograph, the only picture Buck had of Emma from before he'd left. The one thing he'd carried with him through 20 years of drifting. Buck stared at the ceiling, trying to remember every detail of that photo. The yellow ribbons in Emma's hair, the gap between her front teeth, the way she'd been grinning at something off camera, probably Dale making a face to get her to smile for her mother, who'd been holding the camera. That memory led to others, tumbling over each other like stones down a hill. Emma learning to ride, her small hands gripping the reins, while Buck walked beside her, holding the saddle horn in case she slipped. Emma helping in the kitchen, standing on a stool so she could reach the counter, her tongue poking out in concentration as she tried to crack eggs the way her mother showed her. Emma running through the sprinkler on summer evenings, shrieking with laughter. And then Emma, at 16, quieter, more serious, asking Buck why he and Uncle Dale weren't speaking anymore. Buck telling her it was complicated, that she'd understand when she was older. The disappointment in her eyes when he wouldn't explain further. Emma at 20, the last time he'd seen her, standing in the driveway as Buck loaded his truck, asking him not to go, telling him they could work it out, whatever it was. Buck climbing into the cab without answering, driving away while she stood there with tears on her face. That image haunted Buck more than any other. His daughter crying, begging him to stay, and Buck too proud and too ashamed to do the one thing that mattered most. Morning came slowly. Buck woke to Scout licking his hand, the dog's way of saying it was time to move. Every muscle in Buck's body protested as he sat up. His ribs were worse than yesterday, the bruising spreading across his torso in shades of purple and black. But he could breathe, he could move, and that meant he had to keep going. They left the line shack and headed east, Scout leading the way with a confidence that suggested he knew these woods better than Buck did. The morning was cooler, a front having moved through overnight, and Buck was grateful for the reprieve from the heat. It took most of the day to reach the edge of the ranch property and then another hour to make it to the highway. Buck stood on the shoulder watching cars zoom past and realized he had no way to contact anyone and nowhere to go. Voight's men had taken his keys, which meant they likely had access to his trailer. Even if he made it back there, what would be waiting for him? Scout sat beside him, patient as ever, and Buck made a decision. "Come on," he said. "Let's head into town. Maybe I can find someone who'll give us a ride." Redemption Creek was 6 miles down the highway. They walked the shoulder, Scout trotting ahead and then circling back, making sure Buck was still following. Cars passed without stopping. A pickup truck slowed, the driver giving Buck a suspicious look, then sped up again when he saw the condition Buck was in. Bruised, dirty, walking with a limp and accompanied by a stray dog. Buck didn't blame him. He looked like trouble, and most people had enough sense to avoid trouble when they saw it. They reached the outskirts of town as the sun was setting. Buck's trailer park was on the other side of Redemption Creek, but he needed to check something first. He needed to know if Voight's men had been there, if there was anything left worth salvaging. The trailer park manager, a man named Chester, who Buck had never liked, was in his office watching television. He looked up when Buck knocked on the window, his expression shifting from annoyed to alarmed. "Jesus, Buck, what happened to you?" "Had some trouble. Anyone been by my place?" Chester nodded slowly. "2 guys yesterday said they were friends of yours, needed to get something from your trailer. I gave them the spare key." Buck's stomach sank. "They take anything?" "Couldn't say. They were only inside for 10 minutes or so. I brought the key back after." Buck thanked Chester and walked toward his trailer, Scout close at his heels. The door was unlocked. Buck pushed it open and stood in the entrance, taking in the damage. They'd ransacked the place thoroughly. Drawers pulled out, cushions sliced open, his meager possessions scattered across the floor. But they'd been looking for something specific, money probably, or anything valuable they could fence. Buck didn't have anything worth stealing, which meant most of his stuff was still there, just destroyed. He stepped inside carefully, Scout waiting at the door. Buck went straight to the small cabinet above the refrigerator, the one place he kept anything that mattered. The box was still there. A shoebox, old and battered, held together with rubber bands. Buck pulled it down with shaking hands and carried it to the small table, pushing aside the debris to make space. Inside were letters. 23 of them, all addressed to Buck Rawlins at various addresses over the years, all forwarded multiple times as Buck moved from place to place. All from Emma. Buck had never opened them, not a single one. Each time a letter arrived, he'd felt the weight of his guilt crushing down harder. He'd told himself he didn't deserve to read them, didn't deserve to know what Emma had to say. The letters had been following him for 2 decades, a paper trail of all the moments he'd missed. All the words he'd been too cowardly to read. Now he sat at the table and stared at them, his hands trembling. Scout pushed through the doorway and came to sit beside Buck's chair, offering silent support. Buck picked up the oldest letter, postmarked 21 years ago. The envelope was yellowed with age, Emma's handwriting young and careful. He slid his finger under the flap and opened it. "Dear Dad, I'm getting married next month. His name is David, and he's a good man. He works at the hardware store in town, and he makes me laugh. I know you won't be there to walk me down the aisle, but I wanted you to know anyway. Uncle Dale said he'd do it if you can't come. I hope you're okay wherever you are. I hope you're happy. I miss you. Love." Emma. Buck's vision blurred. He set the letter down and picked up another, this one from 18 years ago. "Dear Dad, I had a baby boy. We named him Marcus, after David's father. He's perfect. He has your eyes, the same brown that I remember. I wish you could meet him. I wish he could know his grandfather. But I understand if you can't come back. Uncle Dale sends his love. He says you're probably doing important work somewhere. I want to believe that love, Emma." Another letter, 15 years ago. "Dear Dad, David left. I don't know where he went. There was debt I didn't know about, gambling and other things. I'm trying to keep the house, trying to take care of Marcus on my own. Uncle Dale has been helping, but I know he's struggling too. The ranch isn't doing well. I got my nursing license. I'm working at the hospital in Austin. It's hard, but I like helping people. I think you'd be proud, maybe. I hope you are. Love." Emma. Buck read through every letter, his tears falling onto the paper, smudging ink that was already faded with time. 23 letters spanning 21 years. Emma's wedding, her son's birth, her divorce, her mother's cancer diagnosis, her mother's death, her struggles with debt. Her move back to Texas. Each letter a moment Buck had missed, a piece of her life he'd chosen not to be part of. The final letter was dated 6 months ago. Dear Dad, I don't know if you get these letters. I don't know if you're even alive. But I need to write this, need to say it even if you never read it. Mom died 3 years ago. The medical bills took everything. I had to take out loans against the ranch to pay them. Uncle Dale had already died by then. Cancer, it was fast. He left the ranch to me, but it came with debt I didn't know about. I've been trying to save it, but I'm drowning. I'm not writing to ask for help. I'm writing to tell you that I forgive you. Whatever happened between you and Uncle Dale, whatever made you leave, I forgive you. I've been angry for so long, but I'm tired of carrying it. Life's too short. I work at Austin Medical Center, ER nurse. Room 347. If you ever want to stop by, I'm there most days. I'd like to see you again. I'd like Marcus to meet his grandfather. But if you can't, if it's too hard or too late, I understand. I just wanted you to know, you're forgiven. You always were. Love always. Emma. Buck put his head down on the table and wept. Scout pressed against his leg, warm and solid and present in a way Buck hadn't allowed himself to be for anyone in decades. When he finally raised his head, the trailer was dark. Buck's eyes had adjusted, and he could see Scout watching him with those mismatched eyes, patient and understanding in a way that transcended species. She forgave me, Buck said to the dog. She forgave me, and I didn't even know. Scout's tail thumped once against the floor. Buck gathered the letters carefully, putting them back in the shoebox. These weren't just paper anymore. They were a roadmap, a way back to the daughter he'd abandoned and the life he'd thrown away. He just had to find the courage to follow it. Buck spent the night in his ransacked trailer. Scout curled up on the floor beside the fold-out couch that passed for a bed. He didn't sleep much. His ribs hurt too badly for that, and his mind kept circling back to Emma's letters, particularly the last one. She'd forgiven him. The words felt impossible, like a gift Buck didn't know how to receive. Morning came with birdsong and the sound of Chester mowing the common area. Buck cleaned himself up as best he could in the tiny bathroom, examining his face in the mirror. The bruise above his eye had turned a spectacular purple-green, and his ribs protested every movement. But he'd survived worse in his younger days. And he wasn't done yet. He found a can of dog food in the back of his cupboard, left over from a neighbor's pet he'd watched once, and opened it for Scout. The dog ate gratefully, while Buck made coffee with the last of his grounds. They shared a simple breakfast, Buck with stale bread and peanut butter, Scout finishing off the dog food and licking the can clean. We need a plan, Buck said to Scout. The dog looked up from his empty can, attentive. You can't just walk into that hospital looking like this. Emma's an ER nurse. She'd probably try to admit me. But before he could face Emma, Buck needed to understand what he was walking into. The ranch was in foreclosure, Emma had said so in her letter. But Buck's name was still on the original deed. He'd never signed it over to Dale, never formally given up his claim. That might mean something legally, or it might mean nothing. He needed to find out which. Buck locked up the trailer. What was left to steal he couldn't imagine, and walked into town with Scout beside him. Redemption Creek hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same storefronts lined Main Street, though some of the names had changed. The hardware store was now an antique shop. The old diner had become a coffee place with a French name Buck couldn't pronounce. The county clerk's office was in the municipal building, a squat, concrete structure that had been ugly when it was built in the 70s and hadn't improved with age. Buck tied Scout to a bike rack outside. The dog didn't seem to mind and went inside. The clerk was a woman in her 30s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Susan. She looked up from her computer when Buck approached the desk. Help you. Need to look at property records, Buck said. Rawlins Ranch out on County Road 12. Susan's expression shifted slightly, recognition or maybe just curiosity. You family? I'm Buck Rawlins. My name's on the deed. That got her attention. She pulled up the records on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a moment, she turned the screen so Buck could see. Property's in foreclosure, she said. Bank filed notice 3 months ago. Sale date is set for 2 weeks from now, unless the debt is settled. She scrolled down. Says here the property is co-owned by Buck Rawlins and Dale Rawlins. Dale passed away 3 years ago, left his share to Emma Rawlins. But you're right, your name is still on it. You never signed over your portion. Buck felt something shift in his chest. Hope maybe, or just the possibility of it. What does that mean legally? Susan considered. I'm not a lawyer, but generally speaking, you'd have standing to contest the foreclosure, or at least to be notified before any sale goes through. She looked at him more carefully. Were you notified? No, that's a problem for the bank then. They're supposed to notify all owners of record. She wrote something down on a sticky note. You should talk to a lawyer. There's a legal aid office over on 5th Street. They handle pro bono cases. Buck thanked her and turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. The bank shows who's buying it after foreclosure. Susan pulled up another screen. Shell Company? Voigt Properties, LLC. They've bought several places around here in the last year. Buck nodded, unsurprised. He left the municipal building and found Scout waiting patiently, tail wagging at Buck's return. They walked to 5th Street together, Buck's mind working through what he'd learned. If he still had legal standing, maybe he could stop the sale, or at least slow it down long enough to find another solution. The legal aid office was in a converted house, shabby but clean. Buck tied Scout outside again and went in. A young woman sat at the reception desk, and Buck explained what he needed. She directed him to wait, and 10 minutes later, he was sitting across from an attorney named Margaret Chen. Margaret couldn't have been more than 30, with sharp eyes and a direct manner that reminded Buck of his mother. She listened to his story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. That's quite a situation, she said when he finished. Let me ask you something, Mr. Rawlins. Why now? Why come back after 20 years? Buck considered the question. He could give her the simple answer, that he'd overheard Voigt's name in a bar, that he'd been attacked and left for dead. But sitting across from this young woman who was offering to help him, Buck felt compelled to tell the truth. I was a coward, he said. 20 years ago, I had a fight with my brother over money and pride, and instead of working it out, I left. Left the ranch, left my daughter, left everything. Told myself I was doing the right thing, but really I was just running. I've been running ever since. He met her eyes. A dog saved my life a couple days ago. Made me realize maybe it was time to stop running. Margaret studied him for a long moment. I appreciate your honesty. Most people try to make themselves the hero in their own story. I'm nobody's hero, Buck said. But that land, it belongs to my family. My father built that ranch from nothing. Dale kept it going when I wasn't there. And Emma's trying to hold on to it even though it's drowning her in debt. I don't deserve to claim it, but she does. If there's a way to help her keep it, I want to try. Margaret tapped her pen against her legal pad. I'll look into it. No promises. But if the bank failed to notify you properly, we might have grounds to halt the sale. Give me a few days to research. Buck gave her his contact information, what little of it there was, and left the office feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite hope, but the possibility of it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he could do something right. He collected Scout and they walked toward the diner, the old one that had been there since Buck was young, not the fancy coffee place. Ruby's Place, it was called now, named after the woman who'd bought it 15 years ago. Buck pushed through the door. Scout waiting outside in the shade. Ruby herself was behind the counter, 60-something and formidable, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked up when Buck walked in, and her expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been anger or might have been relief. Buck Rawlins, she said. Thought you were dead. Not quite, Buck said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Not yet anyway. Ruby poured him coffee without asking. You look like hell. Feel worse. She set the coffee in front of him and leaned against the counter, studying him the way Scout sometimes did, seeing more than Buck was comfortable with. Dale used to come in here every Sunday morning, she said. Right up until he got sick. Always ordered the same thing, eggs over easy, bacon, biscuits with gravy. And every Sunday, he'd look at the door like maybe this would be the day you'd walk through it. Buck felt the words, like a punch to his already injured ribs. Ruby, let me finish. Her voice was firm but not unkind. He never stopped hoping you'd come home. even after he got the cancer diagnosis, even when the doctors told him it was terminal. He made me promise that if you ever showed up, I'd tell you something. Buck weighted his throat tight. He said to tell you it was never about the money. He said you'd know what that meant. Ruby refilled his coffee cup, even though he hadn't touched it yet. Dale was a good man, Buck, better than most. He served in Iraq, did you know that? Came back with a Purple Heart and nightmares that woke him up screaming. But he still worked that ranch every day, still took care of Emma when her worthless husband left, still kept things going, because he believed you might come home someday. I didn't know, Buck said. About Iraq, about the medal, about any of it. That's because you weren't here. Ruby's words were blunt, but her expression had softened. I'm not saying that to hurt you, Buck. I'm saying it because you need to hear it. Dale loved you. Emma loves you. But love isn't enough if you're not willing to show up for it. Buck stared into his coffee. I know. Good. Ruby pulled out her order pad. Now what can I get you? You look like you haven't eaten a decent meal in days. Buck ordered eggs and toast, and Ruby brought it out herself, setting the plate in front of him with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness, or at least its possibility. He ate slowly, and Ruby refilled his coffee twice, not saying much but staying nearby, a presence that felt almost maternal. When he was done, Buck pulled out his wallet. He'd found it in the trailer, discarded after Voight's men had taken what little cash he had, and opened it. The photograph of Emma was gone, taken, and the space where it had been felt like an open wound. Ruby, he said. You know where Emma works? Austin Medical Center, ER nurse. Dale was real proud of her for that. She studied him. You planning to go see her? I think I have to, Ruby nodded. Probably should clean yourself up first. You show up looking like you just lost a bar fight. She's liable to admit you for observation. Buck almost smiled. Probably right. He paid for his meal with the last few dollars he had and stepped outside. Scout was waiting right where Buck had left him, and the dog stood as Buck approached, tail wagging. What do you think, Scout? Buck said. Am I ready to face her? Scout cocked his head, one blue eye and one brown eye, considering the question. Then he started walking, and Buck followed, because that's what he did now. He followed this stray dog who'd saved his life, and seemed to know better than Buck did which direction to go. They walked back toward the trailer park, but not to Buck's unit. Instead, Scout led him to the communal laundry room, empty at this time of day. Buck washed up as best he could in the utility sink, scrubbing away days of dirt and dried blood. He couldn't do much about the bruises, but at least he looked less like a man who'd been left for dead in the woods. When he emerged, Scout was sitting outside the door, patient as always. Buck reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. All right, he said. Let's go see my daughter. Buck didn't go to the hospital that day, or the next. He told himself he was waiting for Margaret to get back to him about the legal situation, that he wanted to have something concrete to offer Emma before he showed up asking for forgiveness. But the truth, which Buck recognized even if he didn't want to admit it, was that he was afraid. 21 years was a long time. The Emma in his memory was still a young woman, not yet scarred by divorce and debt and loss. The Emma who'd written those letters was someone Buck didn't know, someone who'd lived an entire life while Buck was absent. What right did he have to walk back into that life now? Scout seemed to understand Buck's hesitation. The dog stayed close, offering silent companionship while Buck worked odd jobs around the trailer park to earn enough for food. Chester let Buck do repairs, fixing broken steps, patching a leaky roof in exchange for that week's rent. It was honest work, the kind Buck knew how to do, and it kept his hands busy while his mind wrestled with harder questions. On the third day, Margaret called. Buck didn't have a cell phone, so she'd left a message with Chester, asking Buck to come by her office. He walked there with Scout, hope and dread mixing in his chest in equal measure. Margaret was waiting with files spread across her desk. She looked up when Buck entered, gesturing to the chair across from her. I found something, she said without preamble. Several somethings, actually. Buck sat, Scout settling at his feet. Margaret pulled out a document and turned it so Buck could see. This is the original deed to the ranch, filed in 1947. Your grandfather's name is on it. When he died, it passed to your father. When your father died, it was divided equally between you and Dale. She pointed to the names. Buck Rawlins and Dale Rawlins, co-owners? Neither of you ever amended that. I thought Dale bought me out, Buck said. Or that leaving meant I gave it up. No legal record of either, Margaret said. Dale took out loans against the property, yes, but he never removed your name from the deed. When he died, his portion passed to Emma through his will. But your portion remained yours. She pulled out another document. The bank filed for foreclosure 3 months ago, citing Emma's default on Dale's loans. But they only notified Emma. They never notified you, because they didn't know I still had a claim. Exactly. Margaret leaned back in her chair. That's where this gets interesting. By law, all owners of record must be notified before a foreclosure sale. The bank's failure to notify you is grounds to halt the proceeding, at least temporarily. Buck felt something loosen in his chest. How long could we delay it? Depends on how hard they fight. Could be weeks, could be months. Long enough, potentially, for Emma to find another solution. Margaret paused. But there's more. She pulled out a manila folder, thicker than the others. I did some research on Voight Properties. The shell company that's trying to buy your ranch? It's owned by Carson Voight, the man you said attacked you. And he's been buying up land all over this county. 9 properties in the last 18 months. All foreclosures, all at prices well below market value. He's predatory, Buck said. Worse than that. I found complaints filed with the county. 3 different property owners, claiming harassment, intimidation, even threats. But none of them followed through with pressing charges. Margaret's expression was grim. I think Voight found a way to encourage them to drop it. Buck thought about being tied to that tree, about the casual way Voight had walked away leaving Buck to die. He's dangerous, which is why I need to ask you something. Margaret met his eyes. Are you willing to file a police report about what happened to you? If we can prove Voight personally assaulted you on that property, it strengthens our case considerably. Plus, it might finally give the DA enough to investigate him properly. Buck had never been one for involving the law. He'd handled his own problems, settled his own disputes, lived by an old code that said a man took care of his own business. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Emma and the ranch, and stopping a man who made a living destroying families. I'll file the report, Buck said. Margaret nodded, satisfied. Good. I'll go with you to the station, help you through the process. She gathered her files. One more thing. I took the liberty of reaching out to Emma Rawlins, just to let her know about the legal situation with the deed. Buck's heart jumped. What did she say? She was surprised. Didn't know you were still on the deed. Didn't know you were back in Texas. Margaret's expression softened slightly. She wants to meet with you, Buck, to discuss the ranch situation. When? Tomorrow, if you're ready. I suggested we all meet here, keep it professional and focused. That okay with you? Buck's mouth was dry. He nodded. That night, Buck couldn't sleep. He lay on the fold-out couch, with Scout on the floor beside him, staring at the water-stained ceiling and trying to figure out what he'd say to Emma. Every possible opening felt wrong, too casual. Too formal, too apologetic, not apologetic enough. In the end, he decided to just tell the truth. It was all he had. Morning came too quickly. Buck cleaned himself up, put on his least wrinkled shirt, and walked to Margaret's office with Scout. Ruby had agreed to watch the dog during the meeting. Scout had taken to Ruby immediately, and she'd softened toward the animal in a way that suggested she'd once been a dog person herself. Buck arrived at Margaret's office 15 minutes early. He sat in the waiting room, his leg bouncing with nervous energy, his hands clasped between his knees. The minutes crawled by. Then the door opened, and Emma walked in. 21 years collapsed into nothing. Buck stood, his breath catching in his throat. Emma was older, of course she was older, but still recognizably his daughter. She had her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore scrubs with a hospital ID badge clipped to the pocket. She looked tired. She looked strong. She looked like a woman who'd survived things Buck couldn't imagine. She stopped when she saw him, her hand still on the door. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Buck could see Emma's throat work as she swallowed, could see her hands tighten on the strap of her shoulder bag. "Hi, Emma," Buck managed. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "Dad." The word was soft, uncertain. Not hostile, but not warm either. Neutral territory, a place to start. Margaret appeared from her office, breaking the moment. "Emma, Buck, thank you both for coming. Why don't we sit down and talk through the situation?" They followed Margaret into her office. Emma took one chair, Buck took the other, carefully maintaining distance between them. Margaret sat behind her desk and pulled out her files, and for the next hour, she walked them through the legal details. Emma listened intently, asking smart questions. Her nurse's training showing in the way she gathered information and processed it. Buck mostly stayed quiet, letting Margaret explain, watching his daughter from the corner of his eye. When Margaret finished, Emma sat back in her chair. "So if Dad's name is still on the deed and the bank didn't notify him, we can file an injunction to halt the foreclosure," Margaret said. "Won't solve the debt problem, but it buys time to find another solution." "How much time?" 90 days, maybe more if Voight's lawyer fights it and the case gets complicated." Emma looked at Buck for the first time since they'd sat down. "And you're willing to do this? To fight for the ranch?" "If you'll let me," Buck said. "I know I don't have the right to ask." "No," Emma interrupted. "You don't. You left. You walked away from everything and you never looked back. For 21 years, I sent letters and you never answered. Not once." Buck took the hit because he deserved it. "You're right. I was a coward. I don't need you to admit that," Emma said. "I already know it. What I need to know is why now? Why come back after all this time?" Buck thought about the tree, the rope, the certainty that he was going to die alone and unforgiven. He thought about Scout refusing to leave him. He thought about Dale's journal entries and Emma's final letter, and all the years he'd wasted running from things that mattered. "A dog saved my life," he said simply. "Made me realize I'd spent too long dying slowly when I should have been trying to live. The ranch is in your name now. Dale left it to you, and that's as it should be. But I'm still on the deed, and that means I can help you fight to keep it. If you'll let me." Emma studied him, her expression unreadable. "Uncle Dale loved you. Did you know that? He used to tell me stories about when you two were kids, about how you taught him to ride, how you looked out for him. Even after you left, he never stopped hoping you'd come home." "I know," Buck said quietly. "I heard. He died 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I was with him the whole time." Emma's voice was steady, but Buck could hear the pain underneath. "He asked for you, right at the end, when the morphine was making him confused. He kept saying, 'Buck, Buck,' like you might walk through the door any minute." Buck felt tears burn behind his eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Not here, not now. I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry for all of it." Emma looked away, blinking hard. When she spoke again, her voice was businesslike, professional. "If we do this, if we fight the foreclosure together, I need to know you're not going to disappear again. I need to know you'll see it through." "I will, because I can't do this alone anymore. I've been trying to save the ranch for 3 years, working double shifts, taking out loans I can't afford. I'm drowning, Dad, and if you're going to help pull me out, I need to trust that you won't let go halfway." Buck met her eyes. "I won't let go. I promise." Emma held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something, truth maybe, or sincerity, or just the barest hint that he meant what he said. Whatever she saw, it must have been enough. She nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's fight for it then, together." Margaret smiled, pulling out paperwork. "Then let's get started." 3 days after that first meeting, Margaret called Buck to her office again. This time, her voice on Chester's answering machine sounded urgent, excited even. Buck walked there quickly, Scout trotting beside him, wondering what she'd found. When he arrived, Margaret was sitting at her desk with an old leather journal spread open in front of her. She looked up as Buck entered, her expression a mixture of sympathy and something else, vindication maybe. "I found something you need to see," she said. "It's Dale's journal. From 20 years ago." Buck felt his stomach drop. "Where did you get that?" "County Courthouse evidence locker. 5 years ago, there was a property dispute between Dale and a neighboring rancher over water rights. Dale submitted this as evidence to show the ranch's historical water usage. The case was settled, but Dale never reclaimed the journal. It's been sitting in storage ever since. She gestured to the chair. Sit down, Buck. You need to read this. Buck sat slowly, his eyes fixed on the journal. It was the same type Dale had always used. Brown leather with a strap closure, the pages lined and filled with his brother's neat handwriting. Buck could see dates along the margins, entries organized chronologically. I marked the relevant sections, Margaret said, turning the journal toward Buck. Start here. The entry was dated 3 weeks before Buck had left the ranch. Buck recognized the timing immediately, right after the fight about the loan, right when everything had fallen apart between them. March 15th, Buck and I had it out today. Worse than I thought it would be. He said I was betraying Dad's memory, that taking on debt was a coward's way out. Said I was trying to build an empire when we should be content with what we have. He's wrong, but I can't make him see it. He's so damn stubborn, just like Dad was. The truth is, I don't want to expand. I want to save what we have. The bank called yesterday. Dad's medical bills from before he passed are bigger than Buck knows. The cancer treatments, the hospital stays, all of it. Dad hid it from us, didn't want us to worry. But now the debt's come due, and the bank's threatening foreclosure if we don't settle up. I tried to tell Buck, but he wouldn't listen. Just kept talking about honor and legacy and doing things the old way. I took the loan not to defy him, but to save the ranch. To give us time to pay off Dad's debts and keep the land in the family, but I couldn't say that. Buck was too angry, and the words wouldn't come. So I let him think the worst of me. Better that than have him know Dad died in debt, that the great Walt Rawlins left his sons with bills they couldn't pay. Buck's hands shook as he read. The words blurred, refocused, blurred again. All this time, 20 years of believing Dale had betrayed him, that his brother had disrespected their father's wishes, and the truth was exactly the opposite. Keep reading, Margaret said gently. March 18th, Buck left today. Packed his truck and drove off without a word. Emma cried the whole afternoon. Alice doesn't understand what happened, and I don't know how to explain it to her. How do I tell my sister-in-law that her husband walked away because I couldn't find the courage to tell him the truth? I hope he comes back. I hope once he's had time to cool down, he'll realize that family matters more than pride. But knowing Buck, knowing that stubborn, honorable fool, I think he's gone for good. I'll keep the ranch running. Keep it safe for him, for Emma, for all of us. When he comes home, if he comes home, it'll still be here. That's the best I can do. Buck couldn't read anymore. He pushed the journal away and stood, turning his back to Margaret, his hands gripping the edge of her desk. His chest felt tight like the ropes were still wrapped around him, cutting off his air. There's more, Margaret said. Years of entries. Dale looking for you, hiring investigators, calling every number he could find. He never stopped trying to find you, Buck, never stopped hoping you'd come home. Buck shook his head, unable to speak. Margaret stood and came around the desk. She didn't touch him, just stood nearby, offering presents without pressure. There are entries from after he came back from Iraq. He talks about the war, about what he saw there, about how it changed him. He writes about realizing life's too short to hold grudges. He enlisted because of me, Buck managed. His voice sounded strangled, foreign. Because I left. No, Margaret said firmly. He enlisted because after 9/11 he felt called to serve. That's what he writes, that someone needed to go, and with you gone, he was free to answer that call. He never blamed you for it, Buck. He just wished you'd been there when he came home. Buck turned around. Margaret was holding the journal open to another page, this one dated 3 years ago, July 3rd. Doctor confirmed it today. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months, maybe less. I asked him to be straight with me, and he was. There's no fighting this one. First thing I thought was, I need to find Buck, need to tell him, need to make peace before it's too late. But we've looked everywhere. It's like he doesn't want to be found, and maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's happier wherever he is, away from the ranch and the memories and me. I'm leaving everything to Emma. She's strong, like Buck was. She'll figure it out. But I'm writing this in case he ever reads it. In case someone finds this journal after I'm gone and gets it to him. Buck, if you're reading this, you were always the brave one. Dad knew it, I knew it, everyone knew it. I just tried to be strong enough for both of us while you were gone. The loan wasn't about expansion or ambition. It was about saving what Dad built, keeping it alive until you came home. I never betrayed you, brother. I never stopped loving you. Come home. The ranch is waiting. Emma's waiting. I'm waiting for as long as I have left. Your brother Dalebuck sat down hard, his legs giving out. The journal lay open on Margaret's desk, Dale's handwriting careful and steady, even knowing he was dying. Buck had spent 20 years believing a lie, nursing anger and pride while his brother had been here, working the ranch, looking for Buck, trying to keep everything intact for a homecoming that never came. He died alone, Buck said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. Dale died reaching for me and I wasn't there. Emma was there, Margaret said. And from what I understand, half the county showed up for his funeral. Your brother wasn't alone, Buck. He was loved, but not by me. Not when it mattered. Margaret let the silence sit for a moment. Then she pulled out an envelope from her desk drawer. There's one more thing. Dale left this with his lawyer, with instructions that if you ever came back, you were to receive it. The envelope was sealed, Buck's name written on it in Dale's handwriting. Buck stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid of what else he might learn about the years he'd wasted. Take your time, Margaret said. I'll give you some privacy. She left the office, closing the door behind her. Buck sat alone with the envelope and Dale's journal, two pieces of a brother he'd never understood as well as he thought he did. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside was a military medal, a Purple Heart, the ribbon still bright despite being stored for years, and a note written in Dale's hand. Buck, you were always the brave one. I just tried to be strong enough for both of us. The loan was never about betrayal. Dad's medical bills were going to take the ranch. I couldn't let that happen. I should have told you, but I was young and stupid and proud. I kept the land safe, kept it running. Kept hoping you'd come home so I could tell you the truth. Apologize for not being honest from the start. This medal, I earned it in Fallujah. Shrapnel from an IED. They patched me up and sent me back to work. Nothing heroic about it. But I want you to have it. Want you to know that while you were gone, I tried to be the man you thought I should be. The ranch is Emma's now. Help her keep it if you can. Or let it go if that's what she needs. But whatever happens, know this. You were my brother and I loved you. I never stopped loving you. Come home, Buck. Finally come home. Your brother D-Buck held the medal in his palm, feeling the weight of it. Purple Heart. Dale had been wounded in combat and Buck hadn't known. Dale had come home changed and Buck hadn't been there. Dale had died asking for Buck, and Buck had been drinking cheap beer in some trailer, too proud and too scared to pick up a phone. The door opened quietly. Margaret stood in the doorway watching him. You okay? Buck shook his head. I was wrong about everything. 20 years of being wrong, of believing my brother betrayed me when he was just trying to save what we had. How do I live with that? The same way we live with anything, Margaret said. One day at a time. Forward, not back. Buck stood, tucking the medal carefully into his shirt pocket right over his heart. He picked up the journal. Can I keep this? It's yours. Dale would want you to have it. Buck walked to the door, then stopped. Those men who attacked me, Voight and his people, they left me tied to a tree on land my brother died protecting. I want to stop them, Margaret. Not just for the ranch, but for Dale. He deserves that much, Margaret nodded. Then let's get to work. We file the injunction tomorrow, and I'll push the DA about pressing charges against Voight for the assault. But, Buck, this is going to get harder before it gets easier. Voight has money and lawyers, and he doesn't play fair. Neither do I, Buck said. Not anymore. He left the office and found Scout waiting outside with Ruby, who'd walked over from the diner to check on him. She took one look at Buck's face and pulled him into a hug. The first real physical affection Buck had received from anyone in years. He stood stiff for a moment, then let himself lean into it, let himself accept the comfort being offered. Dale was a good man, Ruby said into his shoulder. But he'd be glad you're here now. That's what matters. Buck nodded against her hair, not trusting his voice. They walked back toward the diner together, Scout between them, the afternoon sun painting long shadows across the pavement. Buck carried Dale's journal under his arm and his brother's purple heart over his heart, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt the full weight of what he'd lost, but he also felt something else: purpose, determination, the bone-deep certainty that he would make this right, that he would fight for the ranch and for Emma, and for the memory of a brother who'd never stopped believing Buck would come home. He just hoped it wasn't too late. Buck didn't go to see Emma right away. He knew he needed to, knew they needed to talk about Dale's journal and what it meant, but the knowledge of how completely he'd misunderstood his brother's actions left Buck feeling raw and exposed. He needed time to process, to figure out how to explain to Emma that everything he'd believed for 20 years had been a lie he'd told himself. 3 days passed. Buck filed the police report about the assault, giving a detailed statement to a detective who listened carefully and took extensive notes. He described Voight and his men, the threats being tied to the tree. The detective promised to investigate, though Buck could see the skepticism in his eyes. Rich men like Voight didn't usually face consequences for violence against people like Buck. Margaret filed the injunction to halt the foreclosure. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week. Buck spent those days preparing, going over everything with Margaret, making sure he understood every legal angle. At night, he read Dale's journal from cover to cover, learning about the brother he'd never really known. Dale had been funny, Buck discovered. His entries were often dry and witty, observing the absurdities of ranch life with a gentle humor Buck had forgotten his brother possessed. Dale had been thoughtful too, recording not just events, but his feelings about them, processing his experiences through writing in a way Buck had never learned to do. The war entries were harder to read. Dale wrote about the heat and the fear and the friends he'd lost. He wrote about the explosion that earned him the Purple Heart, about lying in the dust convinced he was dying, about the medic who'd saved his life. He wrote about coming home and finding that nothing fit quite right anymore, that the ranch felt smaller, and the silence felt louder and the nightmares wouldn't stop. Through it all, Dale wrote about Buck, wondering where he was, hoping he was safe, wishing they could talk just once, so Dale could explain what had really happened with the loan. The longing in those entries broke something in Buck that he wasn't sure could be repaired. On the 4th day, Buck called the hospital and asked for Emma. The receptionist put him through to the ER nurses' station. A young woman answered, said Emma was with a patient, asked if Buck wanted to leave a message. Tell her it's her father, Buck said. Tell her I'd like to see her. When she has time, the young woman's voice softened. I'll let her know. Emma called back 2 hours later, catching Buck at Ruby's diner, where he'd been nursing coffee and pushing a piece of pie around his plate. Chester brought the phone to his table. Ruby didn't allow cell phones, and the diner's landline was the number Buck had left. Dad. Emma's voice was cautious. Emma, thanks for calling back. Margaret told me about Dale's journal. About what you learned. Buck closed his eyes. I was wrong. About everything. For 20 years, I blamed Dale for something he was trying to prevent. I know what you thought, Emma interrupted. Uncle Dale told me about the fight before he died. He made me promise that if you ever came back, I'd tell you the truth about the loan. He shouldn't have protected me like that. He protected his brother. That's what family does. Emma's voice softened slightly. Listen, I'm off tomorrow. Can you meet me at the ranch? I think we need to see it together, talk about what we're going to do. Buck's throat tightened. The ranch. He hadn't been back since Voight's men had left him for dead. What time? 10 in the morning. I'll be there. That night, Buck couldn't sleep. He lay on the fold-out couch with Scout beside him, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the ranch, the house where he'd grown up, the barn where his father had taught him to work, the land that 3 generations of Rawlins had cared for. Tomorrow he'd see it again. Tomorrow he'd walk that ground with his daughter and try to figure out how to save what was left of their family's legacy. Morning came slowly. Buck dressed carefully, putting on his cleanest jeans and the shirt Emma had given him for his birthday the year before he'd left. He'd carried it with him all these years. Never worn it, couldn't say why he'd kept it. Scout watched him with those mismatched eyes, tail wagging slowly. You're coming too, Buck told the dog. You're part of this now." They drove out to the ranch in Buck's truck, taking the same road Buck had driven what felt like a lifetime ago. The morning was cool, the first real hint of fall in the air. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only Texas seemed to produce, clear and bright and endless. Emma's car was already parked by the house when Buck arrived. She was standing on the front porch, wearing jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, more like the Emma Buck remembered. Scout jumped out of the truck first, and Emma's face lit up. "Who's this?" she asked, kneeling down as Scout approached cautiously. "This is Scout," Buck said, climbing out more slowly. "He's the dog I told you about. The one who saved my life." Emma let Scout sniff her hand, then began scratching behind his ears. "Hi, Scout. I've heard good things about you." She looked up at Buck. "Uncle Dale always wanted a dog, did you know that?" Buck shook his head. "I didn't know much about Dale, turns out." Emma stood. "Come on, let me show you what's left." They walked the property together, Scout ranging ahead, but always circling back to check on them. Emma pointed out what had been maintained and what had fallen into disrepair. The house needed a new roof. The barn was structurally sound, but the paint was gone and some of the boards needed replacing. The fences were down in a dozen places. The old equipment shed had partially collapsed under its own weight. "It's a lot of work," Emma said. "More than I can do alone, even if we win the legal battle. The debt is real, Dad. Even if we stop the foreclosure, I still owe nearly $200,000. I've been making payments, but barely. The interest alone is killing me." Buck walked to the fence line, looking out over the hills. Scout came to stand beside him. "Your uncle kept this place running by himself for nearly 20 years. That's what I can't get past. All that work, all that dedication, and you were gone," Emma said, coming to stand on his other side. "You made a mistake. A big one. But standing here feeling guilty about it doesn't change anything. I know, do you?" Emma turned to look at him directly. "Because I need to know if you're here to help or if you're here to punish yourself. I don't have time for the second one. If we're going to save this place, I need a partner, not a penitent." Buck met her eyes. They were the same brown as his, the same brown that had looked out from 3 generations of Rawlins faces. "I'm here to help, however I can." "Okay." Emma pulled something from her pocket, her stethoscope, the one she wore at work. She held it up, and Buck saw his reflection distorted in the silver. "This is what I do now. I save lives. Or I try to, anyway. Some people you can save, some you can't, but you have to try. That's what Uncle Dale did with this ranch. He tried to save it because it mattered, even when it seemed impossible. And you think we can save it too. I think we have to try." She tucked the stethoscope back in her pocket. "Margaret's strategy will buy us time, but time won't solve the debt problem. We need to find money somehow, either through a new loan or selling part of the land. Or I don't know, something." Buck thought about his own finances, the $43 in his wallet and the odd jobs that barely covered his trailer rent. He had nothing to offer financially, but maybe there was something else he could offer. "I can work," he said. "I'm 68, but I'm not dead yet. Dale kept this place running alone. Maybe the two of us can bring it back to something sellable or operational. Maybe we can make it produce enough to start paying down that debt." Emma studied him. "That would take years. Then we have years. You'd stay for years?" Buck heard the real question underneath. Would he commit to this? Would he stay this time, or would he run again when things got hard? "I'm done running," Buck said simply. Emma nodded slowly. "There's something else. Someone else. Someone I want you to meet." She pulled out her phone. Buck was always a little amazed by the things these devices could do, and sent a text message. A few minutes later, another vehicle pulled up the drive. A young man climbed out, early 20s, tall and lean, with Emma's dark hair and Buck's brown eyes. Buck's breath caught. "Dad," Emma said. "This is Marcus, your grandson." Marcus approached slowly, his expression guarded. He stopped a few feet away, studying Buck with a frank assessment of youth. "So you're the grandfather who disappeared." "Marcus," Emma started. "It's okay," Buck said. "He's right. That's exactly what I am." Marcus crossed his arms. Mom's been killing herself trying to save this place, working double shifts, taking on extra debt, all for a ranch she never even wanted because her uncle left it to her, and she felt obligated. You know how many nights I found her crying over bills. How many times I've tried to convince her to just let it go. I didn't know, Buck said quietly. I should have, but I didn't. She wrote you letters, Marcus said, for 21 years. Did you ever read them? Not until last week. I kept them, but I didn't read them. I was too ashamed, Marcus laughed, bitter and hard. Too ashamed to read letters, but not too ashamed to let your daughter struggle alone. Marcus, that's enough, Emma said. No, it's not. Marcus turned to his mother. You want me to welcome this guy back with open arms? To pretend like 21 years of absence doesn't matter. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't do that. Emma's face was pained. I know, I'm not asking you to. I just thought that we could be a family. Marcus shook his head. We are a family, you and me. We've been a family my whole life without him. Buck felt each word like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch away. Marcus was right. Emma had raised her son alone, had built a life and a family without Buck, and Buck had forfeited any right to be part of that by choosing to stay away. You're absolutely right, Buck said. You don't owe me anything. Your mother doesn't owe me anything. I walked away and I can't take that back. But I'm here now, and I'd like to help if you'll let me. Not because I've earned it, but because this ranch mattered to my brother and it matters to your mother. And maybe if we work together, we can save it. Marcus looked at Emma. Your call, Mom. You want him here? Emma's eyes moved between her son and her father. Buck saw the conflict in her face, the years of pain warring with the possibility of redemption. Finally, she nodded. Yes, I want him here. Marcus sighed. Then I'll be here too. Someone needs to keep an eye on him. Emma smiled, small but genuine. Thank you. Scout, who'd been sitting quietly through the entire exchange, got up and walked to Marcus. The dog sat at the young man's feet, looking up at him with those strange, mismatched eyes. Marcus looked down, surprised. That's Scout, Emma said. He saved your grandfather's life. Marcus knelt down and let Scout sniff his hand. He's got weird eyes. One from each world, Buck said. My father used to say dogs like that can see things the rest of us miss. Marcus looked up at Buck. Your father. My great-grandfather. The one I never met because you left before I was born. Yes. Tell me about him sometime, Marcus said, standing. Not now, but sometime. If we're going to save this place, I should know whose legacy we're fighting for. Buck felt something ease in his chest. Not forgiveness. Marcus hadn't offered that, might never offer that. But acknowledgement, a willingness to try. That was more than Buck deserved, and more than he'd hoped for. I'd be honored to tell you about him, Buck said. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, making lists of what needed to be done, discussing possibilities. Emma had a practical mind, breaking down problems into manageable pieces. Marcus knew carpentry. He'd worked construction summers to help with bills, and he could fix most of what was broken given time and materials. Buck brought decades of ranch experience, knowledge of the land and how to work it. As the sun started to set, they stood together on the porch, Buck, Emma, Marcus, and Scout, looking out over the hills that had sheltered 3 generations of Rawlins, and might shelter more yet. Court hearings in 3 days, Emma said. We'll know then if we have a chance. We have a chance, Buck said. Dale made sure of that. He kept this place alive when it should have died. Now we just have to honor what he did. Emma reached out and took Buck's hand. It was the first time she'd touched him since he'd come back, and Buck felt the weight of it, the significance. Not forgiveness, but something close to it. Hope, maybe. Or just the willingness to try. Let's go fight for it then, she said. Together. The courthouse was packed on the day of the hearing. Buck arrived with Emma and Margaret. Scout left with Ruby at the diner, since dogs weren't allowed in court. Buck wore the only suit he owned, purchased from a thrift store the day before and altered by Ruby with a needle and thread. It fit well enough, made him look almost respectable, like a man who belonged in a courtroom instead of working day labor. Emma sat beside him, wearing a navy dress and her hospital ID badge, a reminder that she was a professional woman with responsibilities and a life beyond this dispute. On her other side sat Marcus, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, looking uncomfortable but determined. Across the aisle, Carson Voigt sat with two expensive lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Buck's truck. Voigt looked confident, relaxed even, like this was just another day of business. He caught Buck's eye and smiled, the expression cold and predatory. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and everyone stood. She was in her 60s, with steel-grey hair and eyes that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse imaginable. She sat, gestured for everyone else to do the same, and opened the file in front of her. "This is a hearing on an injunction to halt foreclosure proceedings on the Rawlins property," she said. "I've reviewed the filings from both sides. Ms. Chen, you're representing the Rawlins family." Margaret stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Make your case." Margaret laid it out clearly and methodically. Buck Rawlins remained a co-owner of the property, had never been formally removed from the deed. The bank had failed to notify him of the foreclosure proceedings, a clear violation of legal requirements. The foreclosure should be halted until proper notification could be given and all parties had time to respond. Voigt's lead attorney, a man named Simmons, who reminded Buck of a snake in an expensive suit, countered smoothly. Buck Rawlins had abandoned the property for 21 years, had made no payments toward any debts, had shown no interest in the land until foreclosure was imminent. His sudden appearance was clearly an attempt to delay the inevitable and should be dismissed as such. Back and forth they went, legal arguments that Buck only half understood. Margaret held her own, citing case law and procedural requirements. But Simmons was smooth, polished, backed by decades of experience and the unlimited resources of Voigt's company. Judge Morrison listened without expression, occasionally asking questions that both lawyers rushed to answer. Buck felt like a spectator at his own life, watching these professionals argue over land and legacy, while he sat silent in his thrift store suit. Then Margaret made her move. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence of Mr. Voigt's pattern of behavior regarding these foreclosures." With the court's permission, she pulled out a folder and handed copies to the judge and to Simmons. Buck leaned forward, trying to see what she'd found. "These are complaints filed with the county over the past 18 months, Margaret said. 3 different property owners who were pursuing foreclosure defense until they suddenly dropped their cases. Each one claims they were harassed, threatened, or intimidated by representatives of Voigt properties." Simmons was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated complaints that were never pursued. They have no bearing on this case. They establish a pattern," Margaret countered. "A pattern of Mr. Voigt using extra-legal means to acquire properties. In fact, she pulled out another document and Buck recognized it. The surveyor's map. The one he'd seen at the ranch. The one he'd described in his police report. This is a survey map found at the Rawlins property, showing detailed plans for development," Margaret said. "It's dated 2 weeks before the foreclosure was scheduled to be final. Mr. Voigt's company was already planning to develop the land before they'd legally acquired it." "That proves nothing," Simmons said, but Buck heard the edge in his voice now. "It proves Mr. Voigt was trespassing," Margaret said. "It proves he was so confident in acquiring the property through foreclosure that he sent surveyors onto private land without permission. And it corroborates Mr. Rawlins's testimony about being assaulted on that property by Mr. Voigt's employees." Judge Morrison looked up sharply. "Assault?" Margaret nodded. "Mr. Rawlins filed a police report 5 days ago, alleging that he was attacked by 3 men, including Mr. Voigt, tied to a tree and left for dead on the Rawlins property. The assault is currently under investigation." The judge turned to Voigt. "Is this true?" Voigt stood smoothly, his expression unchanging. "Your Honor, Mr. Rawlins's accusations are completely fabricated. I've never assaulted anyone, and any suggestion otherwise is simply an attempt to prejudice this court against my legitimate business interests." "Where were you on the morning of October 8th? Margaret asked. "Objection," Simmons said. "This is not a criminal trial." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Ms. Chen, stick to the foreclosure issue." Margaret nodded, but Buck could see she'd made her point. The judge was looking at Voight differently now, with suspicion instead of neutrality. "Your Honor," Margaret said, "the fact remains that Mr. Rawlins was never properly notified of these proceedings. That's not a technicality, it's a fundamental requirement of due process. We're not asking the court to dismiss the debt or prevent eventual foreclosure if the Rawlins family cannot meet their obligations. We're simply asking for time for proper notification, time to explore alternatives, a time to address this in a manner consistent with the law." Judge Morrison looked at the papers in front of her, then at Buck. "Mr. Rawlins, stand up." Buck stood, his heart hammering. "Why are you back now?" the judge asked. "After 21 years of absence, why show up the moment your family's about to lose this property?" Buck thought about all the things he could say. About Scout and the tree and Dale's journal. About Emma's letters and his years of cowardice. But in the end he went with the simple truth. "Because I was wrong, Your Honor, about everything. I spent 20 years running from my mistakes instead of facing them. My brother kept that ranch alive, hoping I'd come home, and he died before I found the courage to do it. My daughter has been carrying the weight of our family's legacy alone while I hid from it. I can't change the past, but I can show up now. I can fight for what my brother died protecting. If that's too little, too late, I understand. But it's all I have to offer." The courtroom was quiet. Judge Morrison studied Buck for a long moment. "Sit down, Mr. Rawlins." Buck sat. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. Judge Morrison shuffled her papers, her expression thoughtful. "I'm going to take a recess," she said. 30 minutes. "Then I'll issue my ruling." She stood and left through the door behind the bench. Everyone else stood, then slowly filed out into the hallway. Buck found himself standing between Emma and Marcus. Margaret, conferring with another lawyer a few feet away. Voight approached, Simmons trying to hold him back. He stopped in front of Buck, close enough that Buck could smell his expensive cologne. "You should have stayed in whatever hole you were hiding in," Voight said quietly. "You think you can stop this? You think some sob story about your dead brother and your estranged daughter is going to change anything?" "Mr. Voight," Simmons warned. But Voight ignored him, focused on Buck with an intensity that bordered on rage. "I own the bank. I own the debt. One way or another, I will get that land. And when I do, the first thing I'm going to build on it is a monument to your failure as a man and a father." Emma stepped forward. "Are you threatening my father?" Voight smiled, turning his attention to her. "Just stating facts, Ms. Rawlins. Your uncle couldn't keep the ranch profitable. You certainly can't. And your father," he glanced back at Buck, "couldn't even stay." Marcus moved fast, his fist already swinging. Buck caught his grandson's arm before the punch could land. "Don't," he said quietly. "He's not worth it," Voight laughed. "Smart man." The wisdom came a bit late, didn't it? A bailiff appeared. "Mr. Voight, step back, please." Voight adjusted his tie, still smiling. "See you inside, Rawlins. Enjoy your last minutes of hope." He walked away, Simmons hurrying after him. Buck let go of Marcus's arm. "I should have let you hit him," Emma said. "No," Buck said. "We beat him the right way. In there," he pointed back at the courtroom, "that's how we honor Dale. Not with violence, but with standing our ground." Margaret rejoined them, her expression concerned. "That was a mistake on Voight's part. The bailiff saw the whole thing. I'll make sure the judge knows about the threats. Will it matter?" Marcus asked. "Everything matters," Margaret said. "Now we wait." The 30 minutes felt like hours. Buck stood in the courthouse hallway with Emma and Marcus, watching lawyers and clerks move past them with the purposeful stride of people who belonged in this world. Buck didn't belong here. He belonged on a ranch, working with his hands, feeling dirt under his boots. But this was where the fight was, so this was where he had to be. Margaret approached with the bailiff she'd spoken to earlier. "Judge Morrison wants to see us in chambers before she issues her ruling," she said. "Just me and the opposing counsel. But she asked that both you and Mr. Voight be present as well." Buck's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "Could mean anything. Could mean nothing. But it's unusual." Margaret straightened her jacket. "Come on!" "And Buck, let me do the talking." They followed the bailiff through a door marked private and down a hallway lined with legal texts. The judge's chambers were at the end, a large office with windows overlooking the town square. Judge Morrison sat behind her desk, still in her robes, reading something on her computer screen. "Sit," she said without looking up. Buck and Margaret took the chairs on one side of the desk. Voight and Simmons took the other side. The judge finished reading, then swiveled her chair to face them. "I've been on the bench for 23 years, she said. "I've seen every kind of foreclosure case imaginable. Families who couldn't pay, developers who swooped in, banks that followed the letter of the law, and banks that bent it until it broke. I've seen good people lose their homes, and bad people profit from misery. And I've learned to recognize when something doesn't smell right." She looked at Voight. "This doesn't smell right, Mr. Voight." "Your Honor," Simmons started. "I'm not finished." The judge's voice was sharp. "Mr. Rawlins' story has holes in it. 21 years of absence can't be explained away with a heartfelt speech. But your story has holes too, Mr. Voight. Why the rush to develop this particular property? Why survey it before the foreclosure is final? And why, according to my bailiff, did you just threaten Mr. Rawlins in my hallway?" Voight's expression remained neutral. "I made no threats, Your Honor, simply stated business facts. The bailiff heard you say you'd build a monument to Mr. Rawlins's failure. That sounds like a threat to me." It was a figure of speech. Judge Morrison studied him for a long moment. "I'm going to rule in favor of the injunction," she said. "The bank's failure to notify Mr. Rawlins is a legitimate procedural violation. The foreclosure is stayed for 90 days. Buck felt Emma grab his hand. "However," the judge continued, "that doesn't solve the underlying debt problem. Ms. Rawlins, you owe the bank a substantial amount of money. If you can't pay within 90 days, the foreclosure will proceed and Mr. Voight's company will likely acquire the property. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Emma said. The judge turned to Voight. "I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney's office. If Mr. Rawlins's assault allegations have merit, charges should be filed. And Mr. Voight, if I find out you've contacted the Rawlins family again, if you've made any threats or engaged in any intimidation, I will hold you in contempt and you'll spend the next 90 days in my jail. Do we understand each other?" Voight's jaw tightened. "Perfectly, Your Honor. Good, we're done here." They filed out of the chambers. In the hallway, Voight and Simmons headed toward the exit without looking back. Margaret turned to Buck and Emma, her expression triumphant. "We won," she said. 90 days. That's what we needed. 90 days to find $200,000, Emma said. "How are we going to do that?" "I don't know yet," Margaret admitted. "But it's better than losing it today. We'll figure something out." They walked back to the main hallway, where Marcus was waiting. He stood when he saw them, reading their expressions. "Well, we got 90 days, Emma said. Marcus pulled his mother into a hug. Over Emma's shoulder, he looked at Buck. "What now?" "Now we work," Buck said. "We make that ranch worth saving. We find a way to pay the debt or find someone who'll refinance it on better terms. We do whatever it takes." Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was warm on Buck's face. Emma stood beside him, Marcus on her other side, and for a moment they just breathed in the victory, small as it was. "I need to get back to the hospital," Emma said. "I've got a shift in 2 hours. I'll drive you," Marcus offered. Emma nodded, then turned to Buck. "The ranch. Can you start making a list of what needs to be done? What we can fix ourselves and what needs professionals?" "I can do that." "And Dad," Emma paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Thank you for showing up, for fighting. Uncle Dale would be proud." The words hit Buck harder than any punch. "I hope so." Emma hugged him then, quick and awkward but genuine. Marcus nodded at Buck, not quite warm, but no longer hostile, and they walked to Emma's car together. Buck stood alone on the courthouse steps, watching them drive away. Margaret came up beside him, briefcase in hand. "You did good in there," she said. "Telling the truth, keeping your cool when Voight tried to provoke you. That made a difference." "We have 90 days, Buck said. "That's not much time." "Then we better get started." Margaret handed him a folder. "These are some loan officers I know, people who specialize in agricultural refinancing. Start calling them tomorrow. Explain the situation. Someone might be willing to work with you." Buck took the folder. "Margaret, "I can't pay you. Not what you're worth anyway," she smiled. "I took this case pro bono, remember? Your brother died protecting that land. Seems only right someone should help you save it." She patted his shoulder. "Go get your dog. He's probably worried about you." Buck walked to Ruby's diner. Scout was lying by the back door, right where Ruby had left him. The dog stood when he saw Buck, tail wagging furiously. Buck knelt down and Scout pressed against him, warm and solid. "We won," Buck told the dog. "Not the war, but the battle." "We got time, Scout. That's all we needed, just a little more time." Scout licked Buck's face, and Buck laughed for the first time in what felt like years. He stood, and together they walked back toward the trailer park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in those hills the ranch waited. The land his grandfather had bought, his father had worked, and his brother had died protecting. The land that was now Buck's responsibility to save. 90 days. It wasn't much, but it was more than Buck had any right to expect. He'd spent 21 years running from his past. Now he had 90 days to reclaim his future. It would have to be enough. 3 months later, Buck stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun rise over land that still bore his family's name. The house had a new roof now, the barn wore fresh red paint, and the fences no longer sagged under their own weight. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was standing. More importantly, it was still theirs. Scout lay at Buck's feet, graying now around the muzzle, but content in a way strays rarely were. The dog had gained weight, his ribs no longer visible beneath his coat, and the rope collar had been replaced with a proper one that Emma had bought. On it, a tag read simply, "Scout Rawlins." The screen door opened behind Buck. Emma emerged carrying 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to him before settling into the chair beside his. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, her nurse's scrubs forgotten for the weekend. This had become their Saturday morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, planning the week's work, just being together in a way they'd never been when Emma was young. "Marcus called," Emma said. "He'll be here around 9 with the lumber for the equipment shed." Buck nodded, sipping his coffee. His grandson had become a regular presence at the ranch, working weekends and some evenings, learning the land the way Buck had once learned it from his own father. The relationship between them was still finding its shape, still careful in places, but it was real. That was more than Buck had hoped for. "Hard to believe it's only been 3 months, Buck said. "Sometimes feels longer," Emma admitted. "Sometimes feels like you never left." That wasn't quite true, and they both knew it. 21 years couldn't be erased by 3 months of hard work. But they were building something new, and maybe that was better than trying to reclaim what had been lost. The debt had been the hardest problem to solve. No bank would refinance the full amount, not with the ranch operating at a loss, and Buck's credit history consisting mostly of absence. But Margaret had been creative. She'd found a conservation trust interested in protecting Texas hill country from development. They'd purchased an easement on 200 acres, a legal agreement that prevented any future development of that portion of the land, and the payment had covered more than half the debt. The rest had come from an unexpected source. Ruby had organized a fundraiser in town, reaching out to the veterans groups that Dale had belonged to, telling them about a Purple Heart recipient's ranch facing foreclosure. The response had been overwhelming. Hundreds of people Buck had never met contributing $20 or $50 or $100 because Dale had served and because the story touched something in them about family and legacy and land. It had taken Buck 3 tries to record the thank you video. Emma insisted he make for the fundraiser website. He'd broken down twice, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers and the weight of what Dale's sacrifice had meant to his community. But he'd gotten through it, and the money had come in, enough to settle the remaining debt with $15,000 left over for repairs and operating costs. Voight's assault case was still working its way through the system. The DA had filed charges after 2 of Voight's employees agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Voight himself was out on bail, his development company under investigation for fraud. Buck took no pleasure in the man's downfall, but he slept better, knowing Voight wouldn't be preying on other struggling families. "I've been thinking," Emma said, breaking into Buck's thoughts. About what we do with this place long term. We can't run cattle anymore, not profitably. But there might be other options. Agritourism, maybe. Or leasing some acreage for sustainable farming. Dale would like that, Buck said. Keeping it working land but adapting to new times. What about you? What do you want? Buck considered the question. 6 months ago, he would have said he wanted nothing. That wanting things was dangerous because it meant caring about something enough to be hurt when you lost it. But Scout had taught him that some things were worth the risk of caring. I want to be here, Buck said simply. Want to work this land with you and Marcus. Want to fix what I broke, even if it takes the rest of my life. Want to be your father again if you'll let me. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the hills. Scout's tail thumped against the porch boards, content in the way of dogs who know their home. A truck rumbled up the drive, Marcus arriving early with the lumber. He parked near the barn, and Scout bounded off the porch to greet him, the two of them having formed their own bond. Marcus scratched behind the dog's ears, then looked up at the porch and waved. "Morning," he called. "Ready to work?" "Always," Buck called back. He stood, Emma rising beside him. They walked down together to meet Marcus, Scout dancing around their feet. The three of them stood looking at the equipment shed, discussing how to approach the repair, and Buck felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Not the hollow purpose of work done just to pass time, but the deep satisfaction of building something that mattered, with people who mattered. On land that had sheltered his family for 3 generations, above the barn door, the new sign Buck had carved gleamed in the morning light. He'd worked on it for 2 weeks, taking his time to get the letters just right, sanding and staining until it looked like something worthy of the legacy it represented. Rawlins Ranch, Est, 1947, restored, 2025. Emma had cried when she'd seen it. Marcus had helped Buck hang it, the two of them working together in a companionable silence that felt like its own kind of healing. Now, as Buck watched his daughter and grandson plan the day's work, Scout sitting alert and happy between them, he thought about all the years he'd wasted running. Thought about Dale keeping this place alive, hoping Buck would come home. Thought about Emma sending letters year after year, never quite giving up, and he thought about a scruffy dog with mismatched eyes who'd refused to leave a dying man tied to a tree. Some folks might call that luck or chance or coincidence. Buck called it grace, the unearned, unexpected gift of a second chance when you'd done nothing to deserve it. The land endured. Family endured. Love endured. Everything else was just noise, and for the first time in 40 years, Buck Rawlins could hear the silence, the good kind, the peaceful kind. The kind that whispered, "You're home now. Finally you're home," Scout barked once, sharp and cheerful, calling Buck to work. He smiled, reached down to scratch the dog's head one more time, then walked toward his family. Toward the barn that needed fixing, and the land that needed tending, and the life he'd finally found the courage to live. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of work and purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of building something together. Buck picked up a hammer, Marcus grabbed the level, and Emma marked where the first board should go. They got to work. The 3 of them, and a dog named Scout who knew better than anyone that it's never too late to find your way home.